The city shimmered that evening like a promise no one intended to keep. In the heart of downtown, a towering hotel draped in gold light awaited the elite. The Riverside Grand, a place where history whispered from its marble floors and champagne glasses clinked with entitlement. Inside, the annual Whitmore Foundation Gala was a spectacle of wealth, elegance, and quiet deals that shaped the world in ways most would never see. But tonight, the guest list held a name that some thought didn't belong. Amara Blake, CEO of Blake Horizons, a global real estate and infrastructure empire she built from nothing but grit and late nights, had received an invitation embossed in gold. It wasn't a favor, it wasn't charity, it was business. She was on the verge of finalizing a $5 billion urban development contract with the Whitmore family, a dynasty of real estate magnates whose influence spanned continents. The deal would change the skyline of 3 cities and redefine her company's place in the world. Still, she knew she was walking into their world, a space where her presence would be scrutinized, measured, and, in some corners, resented. The limousine door opened, and Amara stepped onto the crimson carpet. Her gown was a flowing midnight silk, the neckline adorned with subtle diamonds that caught the light without screaming for it. Cameras flashed, whispers followed. She could feel them, eyes that tried to place her, some recognizing her success, others questioning her right to be here. The Whitmore family stood at the center of the reception, tall and gleaming under the chandeliers, surrounded by senators, bankers, and heirs. Richard Whitmore, the patriarch, had the charm of a seasoned politician and the calculating gaze of a man who never wasted a move. Beside him was his wife, Catherine, a picture of practiced grace, and their son, Gregory, who carried his arrogance like an accessory. When they spotted Amara approaching, Catherine's smile tightened. Gregory smirked, and Richard offered a handshake that felt as cold as polished stone. "Amara Blake," Richard said with the kind of politeness that felt more like a test. "Quite the honor to have you join us tonight." "The honor is mutual," Amara replied, her voice smooth, unshaken. But behind their cordial exchange, she caught Gregory muttering something under his breath to a cluster of well-dressed guests, their stifled laughs confirming it wasn't complimentary. Amara knew this dance well. She had been underestimated in boardrooms, ignored at conferences, and talked over in negotiations. But what was about to happen here would not be the casual dismissiveness she had grown used to. It would be a deliberate performance. An hour into the evening, the gala's host invited the Whitmore family on stage to introduce their partners in progress. Amara expected a brief acknowledgement. After all, she was the cornerstone investor in their largest project. Instead, Catherine took the microphone, glanced at Amara, and with a syrupy smile said, "And a special welcome to Ms. Blake, who has risen admirably in her career. From what I hear, she's proof that anyone, no matter their background, can find their way into rooms like this." The words hung in the air, dressed as praise, but dripping with condescension. Some guests laughed softly. Others looked at Amara with that mix of pity and curiosity reserved for spectacles. She smiled politely, but her spine locked in place. Gregory added, "Yes, inspiring story, a real testament to persistence, and maybe a little luck." More laughter. The spotlight shifted away, but the damage was done. For the rest of the evening, Amara found herself cornered in conversations where people asked if she was self-it, or if she found it intimidating working with families like the Whit. Every word was a small cut. She answered with measured grace, but the fire in her chest was building. The Gala's chandeliers glittered above her, but she had never felt a ceiling so close. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a message. You may be wealthy, but you will never be one of us. What they didn't know was that Amara had built her empire by turning disrespect into momentum, and tonight, they had given her enough fuel to burn an empire down. When she left, the cameras still flashed, but her smile had sharpened. She wasn't walking away humiliated. She was walking away planning. The deal was still on paper, and paper could burn. The next morning, sunlight poured into Amara's penthouse like it didn't care that the night before had been a battlefield. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline she had helped build. Towers and bridges that existed because she refused to take no as a life sentence. Yet as she sipped her black coffee, the taste was bitterer than usual. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from colleagues, industry peers, and even journalists who had been at the gala. Some praised her composure. Others wanted her side of what had happened. A few, more dangerously, offered their sympathy in public tweets, making the insult impossible to ignore. Amara didn't reply to a single one. She didn't need to explain herself. She needed to decide how to move forward, and in her world, moving forward sometimes meant moving against. She sat in silence, replaying Catherine's voice, the fake smile, Gregory's smirk, the polite laughter of people who wouldn't dare make eye contact when they passed her on their way to the valet. She wasn't angry in the way they might have hoped. She was calculating. There was a difference. Her executive assistant Malik stepped into the room, holding a neatly organized folder. "Morning," he said cautiously. "I've gone over the Whitmore contract, the development rights, the joint investment clauses, all of it. We can still pull out without penalty if we act before the end of this week." Amara looked up. "And what happens if we do?" They lose the leverage. To get the city permits, they'll have to start from scratch. Find another partner with the capital and political reach you've already put in motion. Minimum, 18-month delay. They won't recover easily. Amara nodded slowly, tapping her nails against the porcelain coffee cup. And what happens if we stay? Malik hesitated. They win. They get the project. And they get to act like last night was nothing. For a moment Amara let the silence stretch. Outside the city's traffic moved like clockwork, unaware that decisions made in this apartment could freeze construction across 3 states. Then she smiled. Not the polite one she wore at galas, but the kind she reserved for moments when she knew she was about to rewrite the rules. Then I guess they'll have to learn what nothing costs. 2 hours later, Amara's office buzzed with movement. Her legal team was pulled into a confidential meeting. Financial analysts reviewed every investment channel tied to the Whitmore partnership. And in the corner Malik drafted a press statement, not one that announced the deal's collapse, but one that hinted at serious ethical concerns regarding potential partners. In business, perception was currency, and Amara was about to make the Whitmores look bankrupt. She didn't call Richard Whitmore. She didn't warn him. She simply authorized the withdrawal of every cent her company had committed to the joint venture. Contracts were shredded, digital files erased, accounts locked. The deal wasn't just paused, it was dead. By mid-afternoon, Richard's private line was blowing up Malik's phone. Amara didn't answer. She wanted them to stew in uncertainty. Let them imagine every possible scenario, from scandal to sabotage. She knew the Whitmores prided themselves on control, on crafting the illusion that they were untouchable. Now, with a few strokes of a pen, she had left them exposed. As evening fell, she stood on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker alive. Somewhere in one of those towers, the Whitmores were scrambling, maybe even calling emergency meetings with lawyers and investors. Amara felt no rush to see their reaction. She knew it would come soon enough, and when it did, she'd be ready. Last night, they tried to reduce her to a punchline. Tonight, she had turned their billion-dollar dream into a nightmare. They couldn't wake from this. Wasn't revenge for the sake of pride. It was a reminder. You can't humiliate someone who owns the ground you stand on. The Whitmore estate, a sprawling mansion perched above the rolling hills outside the city, had never hosted chaos until now. In the chandelier-lit dining room, the long mahogany table was cluttered with open laptops, scattered legal documents, and half-empty glasses of expensive whiskey. Richard Whitmore stood at the head of the table, his voice low but tight with frustration. "She's bluffing," he said, though the flicker in his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. "She's not bluffing," Catherine replied sharply, setting down her crystal glass. "The contracts are shredded. Richard, our own lawyers confirmed it. She didn't just pull out, she made it public enough to raise questions without saying a single incriminating thing. The press is already circling." Gregory, lounging in his chair like a man who still thought he could charm his way through anything, shrugged. "So we go to the city council, spin it as a scheduling issue, find another investor. It's not like she's the only game in town." Catherine's laugh was short and humorless. "You think it's that easy? Do you know how many investors have that kind of liquidity and the political leverage she does? None. She was the only one, and thanks to your little comedy routine at the gala, she's now in a position to paint us as elitist dinosaurs to anyone who might even consider partnering with us." Gregory's smirk faltered. It was a joke. Richard turned on him. "A joke that's about to cost us $5 billion and our reputation." His voice rose for the first time, echoing off the polished walls. Across town, Amara sat in a quiet private lounge in one of the city's most discreet hotels. Malik was beside her, scanning a tablet. "Media outlets are picking up on the story," he said. "Some are quoting anonymous sources saying there was an incident at the gala. No one's naming names yet, but it's clear the whispers are about the Whitmores." Amara stirred her tea slowly, her face unreadable. "Good. Let the smoke build before they realize there's a fire." Her phone buzzed again, Richard's number. For the 6th time that day, she let it ring out. There was a special kind of power in silence, and she intended to use it until it hurt. Malik leaned closer. "Do you want me to set up an interview? Let you tell your side." "Not yet," Amara said. "Right now, the less I say, the louder their mistakes will sound." The next morning, the Whitmores went on the offensive. A carefully worded press release claimed that mutual scheduling conflicts had led to a strategic pause in the partnership. They praised Amara publicly, calling her a respected leader in the industry. But the internet wasn't buying it. Bloggers and columnists dissected every word, comparing it to past Whitmore controversies, some digging up old photos and gossip from galas long forgotten. The narrative was slipping, and they could feel it. By midday, Gregory found himself trending on social media, not for his charm or his family's wealth, but for a blurry video from the gala that had surfaced online. It showed him leaning toward his friends, muttering something, followed by their laughter. The audio wasn't clear, but the captions were merciless, filling in the blanks with the ugliest possibilities. Back in her office, Amara watched the clip. Without expression, Malik looked at her, almost expecting a smile. She didn't give him one. "This isn't over," she said. "This is just the prelude." In the Whitmore mansion, Richard finally admitted what he'd been trying to deny. Since last night she's not bluffing, and we are bleeding. By midweek, Amara decided the silence had served its purpose. The Whitmores were scrambling, the media was restless, and the industry was buzzing with half-truths. Now, it was time to give them something concrete, but not too much. Over breakfast, in her penthouse, she approved an exclusive interview with the Global Ledger, a financial magazine respected enough to be trusted, yet influential enough to reach millions. The interview wasn't a rant. It wasn't revenge disguised as professionalism. It was precise. Amara spoke about integrity and partnerships, about how public actions reflect private values. She never mentioned the Whitmores by name, but her message was unmistakable. She would not invest billions alongside anyone who disrespected the very communities they claimed to serve. The article was online within hours, and by the end of the day, it had been shared across every major business forum and social platform. In their estate, the Whitmores read it in silence. Catherine set the magazine down slowly. She's painting us as unfit to lead this project without ever accusing us of anything specific. It's genius. Gregory slammed his glass down. So we just let her destroy us. Richard's gaze was hard. She's not destroying us. She's showing everyone who we really are. That's the problem. Meanwhile, Amara's office became a command center. Malik coordinated meetings with potential allies, developers, investors, and politicians who had once been in the orbit. The response was overwhelming. Some came quietly, afraid to be seen choosing sides. Others came boldly, eager to distance themselves from the Whitmore name. Within 3 days, Amara had assembled a coalition capable of replacing the Whitmore partnership entirely. It wasn't just business anymore, it was a movement. Headlines shifted from gossip about a Gala incident to serious discussions about elitism in corporate America. Panels debated the old guard versus the new wave. Amara became a symbol of change, a living challenge to the monopoly of inherited wealth. In the Whitmore mansion, the tension thickened, legal fees climbed, potential investors pulled out of other ventures, and for the first time, Richard felt the weight of a reality he'd spent decades avoiding. Power could be taken from you without a single law being broken. The Whitmores had always believed that their name could outlast any storm, but storms had a way of eroding even the strongest foundations, and this one was different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was slow, relentless, and public. Every day brought a new headline, a new whispered rumor in the corridors of power. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, the breaking point arrived. The City Development Board, an entity the Whitmores had influenced for decades, announced that it was reopening bids for the billion-dollar project Amara had walked away from. Publicly, they cited logistical concerns. Privately, insiders admitted it was because Amara's withdrawal had rendered the Whitmore plan unviable. Without her funding, political support, and community credibility, the project was a sinking ship. Richard received the news in his private study. Catherine was across from him, reading the same report on her tablet. "It's over," she said quietly. Gregory, standing near the window, turned. "We can fight it. File a suit, claim breach of contract. There's no contract left to breach," Richard cut in. She played it perfectly. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the rain against the glass. Then Richard poured himself a drink and stared at the ice melting. "Do you know what the worst part is?" he asked. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. That evening, Amara stood in a community hall in one of the neighborhoods, set to benefit from the development project. The room was filled with small business owners, local leaders, and residents, the people who had the most to gain or lose from billion-dollar decisions made in glass towers. She spoke to them not as a CEO, but as someone who understood what it meant to be underestimated. They thought the deal was about money, she told them, her voice steady. But it was about respect, and if I let them treat me like I didn't belong, I'd be telling every one of you that you don't belong either. The applause was thunderous. Cameras recorded it. By the next morning, the clip had gone viral, adding another layer to the Whitmores' unraveling. Back in her office, Malik handed her a stack of new proposals from investors who wanted in on the project without the Whitmore name attached. Amara looked at the pile, then out the window at the city she intended to change. "Now," she said, "we build it ourselves." 3 weeks after the Gala, the city's skyline was the same, but in the world of power and influence, the landscape had shifted entirely. The Whitmores, once untouchable, were now synonymous with arrogance and decline. Deals they had counted on 4 years were quietly dissolving. Former allies refused to take their calls. Even the society pages, once eager to showcase their galas, began running more stories about their failures than their philanthropy. Amara hadn't just replaced the Whitmores in the billion-dollar development project. She had expanded it, with her new coalition of investors, community leaders, and political allies. The scope had doubled, ensuring more housing, more jobs, and more infrastructure improvements than the original plan had ever promised. And this time, every decision-maker at the table understood exactly who was in charge. The official groundbreaking ceremony was set for a crisp, clear morning in early spring. The media arrived in force. their cameras catching every moment as Amara stepped onto the stage in a deep emerald suit, the color of ambition and victory. Behind her stood the city's mayor, several council members, and dozens of community representatives. The Whitmores were nowhere to be seen, not invited, not mentioned. When Amara took the microphone, the applause lasted longer than she expected. She let it wash over her, then began. This project is not about replacing one name with another. It's about redefining what power looks like in this city. For too long, the voices that shaped our neighborhoods came from people who never walked our streets. That ends today. She spoke of vision, of responsibility, of building something that would last beyond her lifetime. And though she never once mentioned the gala, everyone in the crowd knew that this moment, this victory, was born from that night of quiet humiliation. She had taken their insult and turned it into a legacy. Across the city, in the Whitmore estate, Richard watched the live broadcast from his study. The sound of Amara's voice filled the room, carried by the television speakers. Catherine sat beside him, her face unreadable. Gregory wasn't there. He'd left the country weeks ago to escape the glare of public disgrace. Richard didn't speak. He didn't pour a drink. He simply stared at the screen, listening to the cheers that weren't for him. Somewhere deep down, beneath layers of ego and entitlement, he understood the truth. The deal had never been lost in boardrooms or negotiations. It had been lost the moment they underestimated the woman who was now shaping the future without them. When the broadcast ended, Richard turned off the television. The room was silent except for the faint tick of the antique clock on the mantel. Outside, the world moved on without the Whitmores. That evening, Amara returned to her penthouse. She stood on her balcony, the city glowing beneath her, the air crisp with possibility. Malik joined her, a quiet smile on his face. "It's done," he said simply. Amara didn't smile back, not immediately. She looked out over the city, the steel and glass reflecting the setting sun. "No," she said softly. "It's just the beginning." In that moment, she knew the real victory wasn't the billions saved or the Whitmores defeated. It was proving, to herself and to everyone watching, that dignity, once defended, could become the foundation for something greater than any deal.